Trade tensions between the United States and China are spilling over into the World Trade Organization, where the two sides took jabs at each other today. RT's Sara Montes joins you right now. Okay, so Sara, what exactly happened at the meeting?
Well, Scotty, tensions between the U.S. and China continue to rise, and it looks like they're spilling out at a new venue. Now, today, members of the World Trade Organization met in Geneva to review U.S. trade policy. This meeting is held every 2 years. China and the European Union accuse the U.S. of taking protectionist measures, putting the WTO at risk. The EU trade ambassador said that multilateral trade is in a deep crisis. He blamed the U.S. to be at the core of this issue. The Chinese envoy said that Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum products are simply protectionism under the guise of national security concerns. But U.S. Trade Ambassador Dennis Shea lashed back and said that the U.S. has one of the most open and competitive economies in the world. He went on to say that the WTO is not well equipped to handle the fundamental challenge posed by China, which continues to embrace a state-led, mercantilist approach to the economy and trade. Now, although Shea did not mention the dispute over steel that started the bulk of the ongoing trade war, he did bring up Chinese practices related to technology transfer and intellectual property theft, an issue that has been a priority for Washington in the negotiations to an end of the trade war. Now, President Trump has also accused China of a litany of unfair trade practices, and the Trump administration has threatened to withdraw the U.S. from the WTO. He claims that it treats the U.S. unfairly. They also say that the WTO is part of the problem that has failed to hold China accountable for their protectionist practices. This since Beijing joined back in 2001. Trump's team is trying to force reforms at the WTO by refusing to allow any new appointments to the appellate body, the world's top trade court. Conversely, China's envoy says that Washington is actually responsible for holding back WTO reform by blocking the selection of judges. Now, Scotty, at the G20 summit, the members of the organization of the WTO did agree that it needs reform, but places like China and others appear that and are worried that the U.S. might dismantle the organization before they actually try to fix it.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the whole organization because there's lots of countries that are involved, and today it wasn't just China that was upset at the United States.
So Japan, Switzerland, and Canada all took part in criticizing the U.S. for their protectionism of trade, which is ironic, which is what Trump is saying about China.
Interesting. Well, let's see how this one plays out. Once again, it's another act in a long-running play. Thanks for joining us, Sara. For more, we are going to turn to former official in the United States Trade Representative Office, Steve Gill. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, so protectionism. Isn't that something that's a positive for the American worker, considering we saw our trade deficit here in the United States absolutely go through the roof when China was allowed to join the WTO?
Well, countries are always accusing others of doing the protectionism they deny, and I think that's part of what we're seeing play out here. China has made it almost impossible for a lot of goods and products and services to enter their country with the protections they have in place for their own industries. The U.S. is actually one of the most open countries in the world in terms of low tariffs, low barriers to trade, very transparent, and what the U.S. has done in recent years has taken a more aggressive approach to trade. And I think the rest of these countries have been used to sort of the kumbaya, let's all get along method that the U.S. has followed in the past, and they're not really used to the more aggressive Trump scenario as they're going into trade these days.
Well, that's one of the things that I think the Trump administration, the trade representatives today were accusing the World Trade Organization, is that they've not held China to the same standards that they've held everybody else to. They failed to force China to open up to truly be like the United States since they put them in 2001. Is there some validity to that statement?
Well, you've had the World Trade Organization deal with several disputes over steel protection in China in years past, and they haven't really enforced the rules. They haven't looked at the rules when it comes to applying them to China, and now you've got the Chinese trying to play a little tit for tat, blaming the U.S. for what they've done in the past. So I don't think that you're seeing anything here other than a continued negotiations. As we've talked in the past, when you're negotiating with the Chinese, every day is another negotiation. You really never come to the end. There's always going to be that additional request. And I think what they're facing now is that Donald Trump has the same approach. No negotiation is ever done, and even after the deal is done, you can always try to get a little bit more.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, Steve, because as I'm watching the video from today and reading over the minutes from the meetings, I find it curious that here you have representatives of these two government bodies that are there, but the actual leadership who can make the decision, who we know ultimately will make the decision, aren't even present except for Trump on Twitter. So was today kind of a waste of time and once again just another round of negotiations that they knew going into it was never going to actually have a solution?
I think what we're seeing right now is posturing on all sides. It's kind of a shadow fight where the delegations are sent there to establish the positions, and then you'll have a President Xi, a President Trump come in and resolve the issue and find a way to move ahead. Keep in mind that the dispute between China and the U.S. has now evolved into the arrest of a major CEO in Canada, with President Trump having dinner with President Xi at the very time that arrest came down in Canada, and President Trump and his closest allies saying the president wasn't even aware that that arrest was coming at the time he was actually dining with President Xi. So there's a lot of things that are going into play that are making this relationship in trade and in other relations very difficult. And I think, again, it's going to take a summit with President Xi and President Trump to resolve them.
Well, it's interesting, Steve, that you also bring up the Canadian aspect of it and the fact that today we actually saw Canada as well as two other countries come out and part of the EU and criticize President Trump and how they're handling it. So will this have an effect on the other deals that are being negotiated right now?
Well, you have a deal now between China or between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, the new NAFTA, that has not yet been approved by Congress. So I think the problem for Canada starting to intercede in these other trade battles is that they make it more difficult for the new NAFTA that they've agreed to, the American-Mexico-U.S. agreement, that is going to make it more difficult if they continue to stir up trouble. So I think Canada may be playing a dangerous game by sticking their nose into this particular fight, while Congress still has to approve the new deal that they've agreed to.
Well, once again, it's like we're playing dominoes, and it's better that we try to ease the tensions than try to ratchet it back up. Thanks for joining us, Steve.
As they would say, can't we all get along?
I wish.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.